A narrow margin of victory. The minority Liberal government survived by the skin of its teeth this week, passing the make-or-break budget vote by just 2 after Green Party leader Elizabeth May made a day of decision to side with the government.
I will vote yes in the confidence that the Prime Minister heard my pleas and committed to meeting our legally binding commitments under the Paris Agreement.
And 2 Conservative MPs, including House Leader Andrew Scheer, made last-minute changes to their votes.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I had technical difficulty. I would like to vote no.
Mr. Speaker, I wasn't able to use my app. I would like to vote no.
The Liberals did eke out a slim win, thanks in part also to 2 abstentions from the NDP, which their leader insisted were done only begrudgingly to avoid another election.
They did not earn our support, and we tried to make changes to this budget. But at the same time, again, Canadians clearly don't want an election right now.
So what does the budget vote reveal about the power dynamics in the House as we enter the final sitting stretch of the year? Our Sunday strategy session is here to talk about that. Kathleen Monk is a former NDP strategist and director of communications to the late Jack Layton. Kory Teneycke was Ontario Premier Doug Ford's campaign manager and former director of communications for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And Scott Reid is a CTV News political analyst and former communications director to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Hi, everybody.
Hey there.
So the budget vote was a number of days ago, but it did end up being very consequential because the Liberals, Scott, are still in power. We are not in an election. There were lots of interesting dynamics at play, though, with the way that the vote actually unfolded. When you walked away from that vote, what do you think it tells you about the politics at play, the power structure in the House?
Well, I think it really shows you that Carney had the whip hand. Knowing the Canadians did not want to go to an election, he clearly felt that he was under no pressure to cut a deal, even as he didn't know exactly where the votes to pass his own budget would come from. So, I mean, he continues to draw wine from that barrel that's labeled not Trudeau, because unlike Trudeau, the NDP come calling, he says, no, I got no interest in making a deal. I don't need to cut a deal. I'm not going to cut a deal. I think you guys will blink. A couple of them did. And then, of course, you had this sort of low comedy farce of the Conservatives, as you mentioned, hiding behind the curtain, trying to engineer the vote too, notwithstanding their public declarations of muscular opposition, make certain that the budget did in fact pass. That was their objective. And so, you know, it shows that the government really is in control right now. But I also wonder if it means the next confidence vote, whenever it happens, is going to be much tougher. So I'm guessing that the NDP feel a bit chagrined. I'm suspecting that some of those votes will be a little bit harder to find, and goodness only knows where the control over the Conservative caucus and Pierre Poilievre is headed.
Yeah, 2 things that I think sort of sum that up. The first is, Kathleen, it became very apparent through this vote that no opposition party wants an election. Not just the NDP, no opposition party. Yeah. But on Scott's final point there as well, I think like it worked this time for the government to play chicken, but that doesn't, like, only by 2 votes, basically. Like, it doesn't mean that it will every time.
Yeah, and you got to wonder what kind of lessons Prime Minister Carney is taking from all of this. As a novice politician, is he going to take the lesson that I don't need to compromise, I can do everything unilaterally, there's no reason to ever horse trade? That might be risky come next fall, when the next budget comes and maybe these parties, 2 opposition parties which are facing leadership tests, one Pierre Poilievre in terms of a leadership vote, in terms of, you know, strength of confidence, and the NDP in terms of choosing a leader, will maybe feel freer to actually go into an election. The NDP, I think, has to be afraid of like not being too psyched out, right? Like just because you're cashless, not a great situation, and you're leaderless, also not a great situation, doesn't mean you should be so afraid of an election, because all of us on this panel have run campaigns that have been low resource and have done very well, and also have done high resource campaigns that actually haven't always performed well. So maybe going into an election next fall or some other time won't be the worst thing. But I think it's really careful that the New Democrats, Conservatives, and the Liberals don't take the wrong lesson from this vote this past week.
Have and leaderless sounds like my life at home. Over to you, Kory. Over to you, Kory. What did you take from this vote?
Yeah, I think largely the same things that have been brought up. Like the opposition clearly didn't want an election. Maybe the Bloc more than the others would have been comfortable going to the polls. But look, you're continuing to see some changes in leadership numbers too. The continued slide of popularity of Poilievre within in the voter world, I think, is probably bad news for the NDP as well. It's you know, a very polarized electorate. As long as it's that, I don't think it's going to yield a better result for the Conservatives or the NDP. So I don't think that that dynamic's going to change until some of those other polling indicators start changing. Nobody wants to have an election if they're going to end up worse off than they are today.
On Kathleen's point, Scott, around like what in particular the government takes from this, kind of joining with what you said in your last answer, insofar as like it worked in this instance to just say like take it or leave it, right? But I think of other examples where that appears to be kind of the vibe. I would say, for example, discussions with Alberta and Saskatchewan about a possible MOU, with BC's premier getting really mad about the fact that he's left out. Like, how do you anticipate, as you look ahead over the next few weeks, some of that playing out?
It's a fair question, because sometimes you watch Carney in action and you wonder if he does not think all this politics is beneath him. And at some point, he's going to have to play politics in order to achieve the outcomes that he wants. But I don't share an assumption that's implied in the answer that Kathleen gave. And that is, I don't think that Carney necessarily cares, in the sense that he may very well want to be defeated on the next confidence vote. It may come. It may be orchestrated to come not next fall, but this coming spring. So, you know, if the government continues to, Kory's point, if it continues to feel that if the next election is really going to be a mano-a-mano match with Pierre Poilievre, and it continues to feel it has a leadership advantage on it, it may want to be forced into an election, particularly if it can blame other parties in the House for forcing Canadians to the polls. So I don't know that they need to learn a lesson about how close they came this time. They might be quite content to come close or even lose in the future.
Yeah, but I think is the lesson that he never has to compromise, because that's one thing. Sure, I agree with you, Scott. We may have to go into an election. He may want an election next fall. But what about compromise and communication, even internally within his own internal caucus? We're talking about outside forces now, the other parties, opposition, premiers, etc., that he's failing to actually communicate with. What happens when he fails to communicate with his own caucus and the environmental activists within his caucus? Canada just received last week
ambassadors to other countries. I don't know.
Maybe, but Canada just received its first fossil award once again from the COP Environmental Conference in Brazil. Canada has not received a fossil award like that since the days of Harper, saying that Canada has moved back on its climate commitments. How is that going to play out in
small
caucus?
Beer, man. Look at the polls. Look at where that issue sits in terms of public opinion.
Agreed, public opinion. But that was one of the things that, in terms of how we pegged and started to paint Stephen Harper through his leadership, and that started to hurt him. And if he is not talking to his own caucus and keeping his own caucus, if this is a fatal flaw of Carney, that he refuses actually to communicate with other people, I think that could be a bad lesson that he takes from this past week.
Well, Kory, I'll throw it over to you just quickly say that, like, what will be a good sort of example of or a test of the different points that both of you are making is how this issue with Alberta and Saskatchewan, and in particular this MOU proceeds, right? Because if it is, as reported, about getting rid of, exempting the tanker ban in certain instances, which many, people, MPs in BC, for example, are against, or the Premier of BC is against, like, that is a different level of political capital that needs to be expended.
I'll be looking for a few things. I completely agree with that, Vashi. I'll be looking for a few things. Whether or not Stephen Guilbeault and Wilkinson and Gregor Robertson find, very important to work to do in a foreign mission someplace far afield, or not in a cabinet role any longer. But there is a split within the Liberal caucus that is this difference between the approach on the economy and the environment that Carney brings to the table and that of Trudeau. Trudeau was happy to have no deals on this and avoid fossil awards or whatever. That mattered a lot more to him. Clearly we're in a very different place right now with the economy, and Canadians have a very different view of it compared to what they would have back in 2015. The environment scores as low as I've ever seen it in modern polling. So, I think Carney is on the right track in terms of where the electorate is. If they're able to land a deal with Alberta, if they're able to show some progress on some of these major projects, if they're able to have some of the tariffs abated, which looks like it might be happening anyway because of domestic pressure in the United States, then, I would be very anxious to go to the polls if I were Carney.
I'll leave it on that note. If Kory Teneycke were Mark Carney, he'd go to the polls. Thanks, guys.
Mark Carney would be wearing a turtleneck.
And a corduroy suit. Have a great one, guys. Thanks so much. Our Sunday strategy session. Kory Teneycke, Scott Reid, and Kathleen Monk. When we come back, the 3 things I'll be watching for next week.